slide there. Oh, there we go. Here we go. So this is getting your K to 8 ELLs to take responsibility for their learning. From my perspective, incredibly important topic. I feel like one of the most important things we can do for our students is to give them a good grasp on how to learn, how to take responsibility for their learning, to not always expect a teacher to be doing most of the things for them or to be sitting next to them. There are a lot of students who very often will only work when you are sitting next to them. And so teaching our students, helping our students to learn how to take responsibility for their learning, to do more on their own without us sitting next to them, without us, kind of prodding them along, is a really important part of being a teacher. At the end of this webinar, I do have some free goodies for you, some things that I have a free unit of resources. And I also have the PDF of this webinar that I'll give you. So stick around to the end for that. During the course of the webinar, we're going to cover some concrete strategies for getting students more involved, ensuring that every student is making really solid progress, and motivating students to take responsibility for learning material. So we'll talk about a few of these things, and we'll focus on really practical strategies you can use in the classroom. There won't be a whole lot of theory, and that's a personal preference of mine. I never really benefited a whole lot from using theory in the classroom, and so I tend to focus more on the practicalities of the classroom, what works and what doesn't work. And so that's what I'll be focusing on a lot today. But if you have any questions as we go along, or you want to clarify if what kind of theory there is behind some of these things, we could certainly talk a bit more about that. By the end of the webinar, my promise is that you'll walk away with very specific strategies and activities that you can use tomorrow in your classes, as well as resources if you stay to the end. So let me tell you a little bit about my story, so you kind of know where I'm coming from. I love connecting with teachers, and it's really through sharing our stories and sharing things that work with each other that we grow as teachers. Originally, I'm from Ohio in the United States, and grew up there. I went to school there, and after I graduated from college in Ohio, I went to Vancouver, and in Vancouver, Canada, I got involved. I was doing my master's there, and I got involved as a counselor at a Taiwanese church, like a youth group counselor at a Taiwanese church. So I was working with a lot of teens and at that point, and of course, they're all from Taiwan, and I got to spend a lot of time with their parents and their grandparents, and their grandparents spoke mostly Chinese, and so I started learning Chinese in order to be able to communicate with the grandparents, and really kind of fell in love with. Hi, Tere, I assume, from Mexico. Nice, thanks for joining us. I'm just telling my story a little bit before we get into the rest of the webinar. We'll talk about really concrete strategies, so hang in there. So while I was in Vancouver, Canada, working with these teens, I decided that I wanted to go to Taiwan and teach. So I ended up in Taiwan on the other side of the world, and I met my wife here, and we started our own school back in 2008. And so you can see in the picture there where Taiwan is. Some people get confused between Taiwan and Thailand. And so Taiwan is the tiny little country off the coast of China. And that's where I'm talking to you from today, actually. So my story, this is a picture of our school, the open house meeting that we have with parents each year, and I get to do the presentation for that in all Chinese. And so it is a challenge, and also something that I have enjoyed doing now for 12 years. The school that we started, when we started it, we took textbooks that we bought from a company here, and started using them in the classrooms, and it was a very frustrating experience. Most of our textbooks were just a lot of fill in the blank kind of things. A lot of the teacher sort of up front and telling students something, and the students would try to, complete some sort of task. But it all felt very disconnected and unhelpful. It seemed like most of the pages in the books weren't really teaching what the students actually needed. And so around, I think, 2009, middle of 2009, we started writing our own textbooks and all of our own materials. And it was through writing those books and training teachers to use those books, and that we developed them, because we could change them any way we wanted to. They're our books, so we changed them based on teacher feedback and based on the results of students. And so over the course of the last decade, we have built this entire curriculum of materials that teachers now really, really appreciate and find very, very helpful. And our students, of course, they do far, far better now after we have managed to start teaching them the things that they really need to know, and getting them practicing in all of the language domains, not just, for instance, filling in blanks. We have them doing lots of speaking, lots of reading, lots of writing, and of course they improve quite a bit more quickly when they are practicing so much. So that all of that experience, all of that time spent developing curriculum and training teachers, and being frustrated and figuring out solutions, and then being frustrated about something else and figuring out solutions to that. All of that really over the course of the last decade has helped me to get a feel for what really works well for teachers, what makes a big difference in the classroom. And so I'll be sharing some of those things with you today, and hopefully you'll find them equally helpful in your classrooms. After recently, probably in the last couple of years, I started moving a lot of what we've been doing at our school online to help other teachers who may be in similar situations, who have curriculums that aren't working for them, or who are struggling to get their students to improve quickly enough. So in that regard, I wrote the book Kid Inspired Teacher, which lays out how to organize really productive, student-centered, and stress-free classes. I cover a lot of, most everything that I talk about today. You can read more about in the book, but there's obviously a lot more in the book that I won't be able to cover today. So, excuse me. If you find that you are interested in learning a bit more, filling out some of the things that we talk about today, you can check out the book at kidinspired.com/book, and that'll take you to the website where you can find a link to Amazon. And so the book is on Amazon. You can buy it digitally, or you can also buy it the physical printed copy. So I also have spent quite a bit of time over the last couple of years putting our curriculum online, making it available for teachers, as well as lots of activities and strategies, things like that. I've been trying to gather all of those things into one place on this website, Kid Inspired Classroom, and making that available to teachers so that they can have access to the tools that our teachers at our school have found really helpful. And it also means that we've got a lot more teachers contributing to the curriculum. So I get feedback and I update, and I'm always gathering ideas and things that work for teachers and putting them together and trying to organize them in a way that makes sense for people. And so if you find that you're in a situation similar to ours, where you're struggling with finding the right materials for your students, you need a curriculum, or you need supplementary materials, you can check that out at kidinspired.com, and you can do ESL/curriculum to get there, but you can also just go to kidinspired.com and find all of this stuff. So I'd love to know what topics you're teaching right now. If you wouldn't mind just popping into the chat a topic that you're teaching. Maybe it can be a grammar topic, science topic, phonics topic. I'd love to try to use specific examples for what you're actually teaching. I did send out an email a few days ago asking people what topics they would be interested in hearing about. And I did hear a few people say that they would like to hear more about reading independently for learning new information. That was one. Improving, getting students working harder at their writing skills was another. And I've noticed somebody mentioned that students rarely do their homework, or they play the games, but they don't play them in the right way. And so, the teacher's asking them to play a game and the students maybe aren't doing what they're supposed to do. It's kind of a classroom management issue. And another really good one was students weren't taking responsibility for learning from their mistakes. They keep repeating the same mistakes again and again, even though, the teacher is explaining them. So yeah, thank you. Teray, I see, I know that was Ronell, grammar and phonics, and Tammy, punctuation, Ronell, math and life skills, and Tammy also weather and science. Good. I'll try to come back to some of those in a little bit, so that we can be specific with some of the examples that we use. And so let me see: grammar, phonics, punctuation, math and life skills, and weather. I'll see if I can bring some of those around back into the examples we use later. So let me give you sort of an overview of the kind of strategy that I would recommend to get your students taking responsibility in the classroom more. When we talk about getting students to take responsibility, we need three things. There may be more, but these, in my experience, are some of the most important ones for getting your students to take responsibility. And those three things are clarity, confidence, and motivation. Those three things. So clarity, knowing exactly what job they need to accomplish. And so, if you're talking about punctuation, you're talking about grammar, you're talking about weather, Teray, I see literacy, thank you. If you're talking about those topics, we need to be very clear about the job that students need to accomplish when it comes to any of those topics. So in a given class, in a given day, we need to know, let students know what it is they need to do. And so if it's punctuation, we're focusing on using different types of punctuation, commas, periods, question marks. Something very clear would be, I want you to be able to identify which of these sentences by the end of class need which kinds of punctuation. So that would be kind of our end goal. And we're going to work our way towards that goal, but we want to be very clear about what that goal is. So today, this is what I want to see from you. And you see this a lot from teachers. They talk about learning objectives and writing that learning objective on the board. And so that's a very helpful thing to do. We want to be very clear with our students about what they need to accomplish. Writing that on the board, making it clear to them. We'll talk about this in a minute, but I like to make it a specific action, not so much sort of a concept. So it wouldn't be something, for me, I don't like to say, you understand how to use punctuation. I like to say, I can identify punctuation in these 5 sentences. I like to be very specific in a very specific action that students need to do to accomplish that goal. So number 2, confidence, believing they're capable of accomplishing that job. This is pretty big. So we will give them a goal that we want them to be able to accomplish. We're very clear about that. But if they don't believe that they can accomplish it, they're going to check out. They're not going to try as hard. They're not going to take responsibility if they don't feel like they can accomplish that goal, if it's out of their reach, if it's too difficult, if they don't understand. And so that feeling, and maybe you believe they can. Maybe as a teacher you think, yeah, you can do this. This is not that hard. It doesn't really matter what you think as a teacher. And if they don't believe that they can do it, then they probably most likely will not try to take responsibility for it to accomplish it. And so we need to really build that confidence up. We need to help them see that they are capable of accomplishing that goal. And we'll have some specific things that you can do to help them with that. And number 3, motivation. Motivation is pretty simple. They just need to feel that accomplishing the job is better than not accomplishing the job. So you have to make accomplishing the job feel a lot better. It needs to be rewarding in a way that motivates them to want to accomplish it. If they feel like the rewards of not doing the job are better than the rewards of doing the job, they're probably not going to do the job. So, if you're teaching grammar and you want them to be able to write 3 really good sentences, and they feel like that is, hell on earth, that's the worst thing that they could possibly have to do in a classroom, and they would much rather sit back and go to sleep, regardless of whether or not you slap extra homework on them, or you take away points, or you get upset and you lecture them. It still may be, from their perspective, more rewarding to not do the job than to do it. So we want to try to set things up in such a way that the students feel like, okay, it's actually better to do this than not. And we'll talk about that as well in a minute. All right, so let's take a look at what are the specific things we can do to help students gain clarity, have confidence, and have motivation so that they take responsibility for what we're doing in class. First thing, and this is a little more, can be somewhat abstract, and so I will try to give some very specific ideas of what this looks like. But when we talk about clarity and when we talk about confidence, this is sort of our starting point. We need to set up manageable and measurable goals. We need to think very clearly about the goals that we want our students to accomplish by the end of the class. So we're not talking about the end of the semester. We're not talking about the end of the unit. We're not talking about any of those things. We're talking about today. And so we want to be very clear about what students should be able to do by the end of the class. And I like to use the words manageable and measurable to help with that. So let me talk about what those two ideas are. First, measurable goals. Measurable means that the students are doing something in particular that you can see, that you can measure. It's not abstract, and I'm not making any assumptions. There's something on paper, or they have said something. Honestly, it's going to usually be writing, or it's going to be speaking, and they're going to do something to produce something so that that you can see. So we have to be very careful to set our goals up in that way where you can measure them. And I'll give some specific examples of that in a minute. Manageable goals are goals that can be accomplished in a single class. So they're not too big, they're not too out of reach. And they're not, and this is where some people I think would possibly disagree with me. They're not tailored to your strongest students. A manageable goal for your strong students is far higher than a manageable goal for your average or your weak students. And so when I talk about manageable goals, I like to say that we want to tailor that goal to our average student. What is the average student in your class capable of completing in a single class? Now, that's going to be different for different teachers. And so when we talk about specific examples, that's going to depend a lot on how often you see your students, how long you have them in class for, how many different levels of students you have in a single class. So all of that's going to affect the kind of goals that we end up choosing. But let's take a look at what this would mean. I have some specific examples, and I'll try to also get to the examples you guys mentioned as well. All right, so I did see Renelle mention phonics and grammar, and those show up here, and math and life skills, punctuation, weather, and literacy. All right, so reading a list of phonics words is a very specific task that students could accomplish. And we want to make it both manageable and we want to make it measurable. So measurable would mean that we have a very clear list. It's these 5 words we want students to read, or these 10 words that we want students to read by the end of the class. So that means it's measurable. They can either read those words or they cannot read those words, but boy, you can tell if they can do it or not. So it's not just, students know long A sounds, A magic E, A, I, A, Y. That is not a measurable goal. I can't measure if they know that. That might be a great goal, and it might be even a manageable goal. They may be able to learn those sounds in a single class. But because I can't measure, I can't see it, they haven't done anything to show me, it's not as helpful. So reading a list of phonics words, we want to make that goal manageable also. So we don't want a list of 50 words, for instance. 50 words is maybe it's manageable. I would imagine for some of your stronger students who can read better, that would be just fine. But most likely for your average student, that's probably going to be out of the question. And by reducing the total number of words down to something like 10, it becomes far more manageable for our students to accomplish that. And again, as we mentioned before, being clear is one of our keys to getting students to take responsibility, but also building confidence is also something that helps them take responsibility. So if we make that goal manageable, if they feel like they can accomplish that goal, they are going to be far more likely to take responsibility for reaching that goal. And so if we make the list something like 10 words, they're going to feel much more confident that they're able to accomplish that goal in a single class. Now, it does not mean, and I'll just tag this on here very quickly as sort of an aside, it does not mean that they have to stop at 10 once they've reached that goal. If you have strong students in your class, you've got students who can read a lot more than 10 words, that's great. But we're tailoring it to the average student, so we set it at 10. And when when students have reached that goal, then they can move on to another assignment, they can move on to another challenge where maybe they would read more words, but at least they've already shown you that they understand and can accomplish your base goal for the class of those 10 words. So that would be phonics. I noticed Renell, I think, mentioned grammar. So number 2 would be more of a grammar focus, saying 3 sentences without mistakes. And so maybe you're working on something like the past tense. I use this example a lot because there are a lot of students who struggle with past tense, especially the irregular verbs, and knowing when to use which form of the verb, and especially when they're writing, a lot of times they're writing stories, but they will misuse the past tense. Either they won't use the past tense at all, or they will use ed on irregular verbs when they shouldn't. Those things. Gretchen, I see you mentioned academic vocabulary. Vocabulary is a good one, and I'll get to that in just a second. So 3 sentences without mistakes is a goal that is manageable. All of the students can accomplish that by the end of the class. Every student can say 3 sentences by the end of the class without mistakes. It's not over their heads. It's not too much. It's very much within reach. So not only are they going to be able to show you, it's measurable. They can either say it or they can't, but it's also manageable. It's not too difficult for the students to accomplish, and so they're going to be more confident that they can accomplish it. So that takes care of 2 of our issues. Now we'll talk about the motivation one later, but for grammar, that would be a very good goal to have for them. Saying a summary of a story or a concept. This one would be when it comes to reading a passage and then being able to summarize that passage. That's a common core requirement for a lot of teachers to get students to summarize content, and a lot of students really struggle with summarizing content. It's very difficult, and funny enough, many teachers, when they've read a story, will sometimes struggle to summarize the story in a helpful way. And of course, we want our students to be able to do that. And of course, that's their second or third or fourth language. And so sometimes it's just way out of reach for them. So we want to try to bring that down and make it manageable and make it measurable. So summary of a story or a concept. And I noticed Tammy said weather in science. So that's a concept. We want our students to be able to understand weather. And obviously they're going to have academic vocabulary when they are trying to understand the concept of weather in science. So that brings in what Gretchen mentioned. So something like weather in science, that's a concept. We would want our students to be able to say a summary of that concept, how, maybe the water cycle works. And so they would start, with the evaporation, and then water falls, and all of the different parts of the water cycle. And so we could give them, there'd be two ways of doing this. One would be able to give them a summary of the story that we are reading or the concept. So with weather and science, we would give them a summary of that, and we would practice it together. And the goal would be that by the end of the class, they would be able to tell me a summary of that concept or that story. And so that would be both manageable and measurable. We would have to make it manageable by either giving them the summary. So I've already written one and I'm giving it to you, and you can either tell me the same summary that I've given you, or you can put it into your own words. Either one is fine. You can also write a summary together as a class that then the students are going to use. And by the end of the class, they should be able to say that summary to the teacher, to you. And so either one of those ways would help that summary of a story or concept, bring it down and make it more manageable in a single class. And so that academic vocabulary at that point would be in the summary. So we would be using a lot of the academic vocabulary that the students need in the summary. And so by practicing it quite a bit, they would become very familiar not only with the sentence structures, the concept of the water cycle, but they would also become much more familiar with the academic vocabulary involved with the water cycle. Remembering 10 vocabulary words, that's another example that I've listed for you there. And these could be academic words. So Gretchen, this could be something that you would be able to use with your students. We could focus on just remembering the 10 words. So that is manageable and measurable. 10 words is not out of the question for most students to be able to remember in a single class, especially if they've practiced it quite a bit. So we're not talking about 20 words, we're not talking about 30, we're not talking about spelling the words, we're not even saying necessarily that they can use them in a sentence, although of course we want them to understand the words well, so they're not just repeating nonsense to you from their perspective. We want them to understand the words, of course, and so we'd have to make sure that the meanings of the words are very clear. But then by the end of the class, they would need to be able to say those 10 words to you. Once they have remembered those 10 words, then you can move on to a next task where they would maybe use those words in sentences. So first is sort of understanding the meaning and remembering the word. Then we move on to using the word in a sentence, and then maybe on a separate class we would focus on remembering how to spell those 10 words. So we would split those up into three different tasks. Writing a paragraph on a topic, that's the next one on the list there. And this is a complicated one. A lot of teachers I know struggle to get their students writing academic paragraphs, well-structured paragraphs, using good vocabulary, good sentence structure, good grammar, good spelling. So when you're talking about writing, you're actually talking about a variety of goals. And so whenever we get into writing, I like to try to pull each part of that apart so that we can focus on what the students need, each part of what the student needs to be able to accomplish the final goal. So if the final goal is to write a paragraph on a particular topic, let's say, weather in science, as Tammy mentioned, and we want them to use the academic words that we've learned, and we want them to use the present simple tense. Usually science texts use present simple tense, and so we want to be able to know when to add that S and when, not to add the S. And so there's grammar involved. What we'd want to do then is pull out, first focus on the vocabulary. So we're going to set up a manageable, measurable goal for vocabulary. We want our students to be able to remember these 5 words, for instance, for writing about the water cycle. And so we focus on getting students to be able to complete that challenge. I can remember these, if we do I can statements, I can remember these 5 words and what they mean. Then we can focus on grammar, present simple tense. I can say 3 present simple tense sentences correctly without mistakes. And so that would help students sort of get a good feel for the grammar that they need to use. And then finally, maybe a goal that, you tell me how to structure a paragraph in your own words. Topic, sentence, supporting detail, supporting detail, supporting detail, concluding sentence. So then we have 3 goals. All 3 of them are manageable and measurable, and you could likely be able to get students to do all 3 in a single class, depending on how much time you have. And so students would first accomplish, say the 5 words to the teacher. Then they would say the 3 sentences to the teacher in the present simple tense. And then they would tell you the paragraph structure. And once they've got all 3 of those pieces, then you would say to them, okay, now I want you to go write me a paragraph about the water cycle. There's one more goal I would add to that. Sorry. I would have them give me a summary also of the water cycle in their own words before they go write it. Learning language is far easier when you're speaking it and listening to it than when you're reading and writing for most students. Some students are just great at reading and writing, but the majority of people are going to be able to absorb information far easier listening and speaking than they are going to be reading and writing. So if we start with listening and speaking, we get them, the concept down, listening and speaking, and the vocabulary and the sentences. Then when they go to write, they're going to be far more capable of taking that knowledge that they have now and then focusing on, the literacy aspect of it. I think somebody mentioned literacy earlier, and literacy is a big one. We want our students to be able to read and write really well, but very often that's going to start with the vocabulary and the sentences and the concepts with speaking and listening instead. So finally, the last example I have there, writing 3 sentences with conjunctions. So if you're working on something like conjunctions, you could have go through how to use the different conjunctions and giving lots of examples. And then by the end of the class, students would have the goal of being able to write out 3 of those sentences on their own. So there's some very specific, manageable, measurable goals there that you would want to have for your students. Now let's talk about how we would move our students along through the class to make sure that by the end of the class, they're able to accomplish that goal. Drink my coffee real fast here. So in this, in each class, I usually recommend to teachers that they would go from the group to pairs and then to individuals. So we start at the group level. And when I talk about the group level, I don't mean that the teacher is talking and everybody is listening. At the group level, we want to keep everyone involved as much as possible. And so if it's the concept of weather in science, the water cycle that I was talking about earlier, it seems like a good example. Then we would be going through a summary of that concept together as a class. And so we could start off with making the first sentence, and then the students would say that sentence with us. Or I would have it diagrammed on the board, and we would make sentences together, and they would be saying those sentences along with me. So it's a very interactive kind of group lesson, and it can have a lot of TPR and total physical response. We can have Hi, Rose. Thanks for joining us. We're just kind of in the middle of it. So if you have any questions later, just ask. Um, the the group's time, we can do a lot of total physical response with that, where students are doing a lot of motions. So, if you're talking about evaporation, you can have all the students doing this every time they say the word evaporation, those kinds of responses, physical responses, actions, behaviors. Even at the junior high and high school level, is really good for them, they helps them solidify it, and it can be a lot of fun, really helps them connect the meaning with the word. But that group level, we started the group level, but it's very interactive. It's not just the teacher up front talking and everyone else sitting and listening. That there's not a lot of learning happening there. Your strong students might benefit from that. Hi, Nadia. Thanks for joining us. If you have any questions later about what you missed, just ask. We want to make sure that all the students are involved, that we move through quickly. We don't want to spend too much time at the group level. And at the group level, we want our students, all of our students, to be far clearer about what they need to accomplish. So that's what we're setting this up. I want to show them by the end of class, I need you to accomplish this. And let's do it together right now. So if it's 10 vocabulary words, we're going to say those 10 vocabulary words 15, 20 times together, and we're going to have total physical response actions that go with each word, and then we're gonna be done. We're not going to spend a huge amount of time at this group level. Our goal is to familiarize all the students with what they need to accomplish by the end of the class. So that helps us be clear. Students are very clear about what they need to accomplish. It also starts to help us with confidence. At this group level, the more that all the students are involved in speaking and actions, whether you're saying vocabulary words or whether you're saying a science topic or whether you're saying grammar sentences, it needs to be very involved. Lots of student participation, and we go through it fast. So if it's grammar, and you're explaining that he, she, it, only one gets an S on the verb. You don't want to spend a lot of time explaining that at an abstract level. You can say that, and then let's make some sentences together as a class. So a lot of interaction, a lot of focus on what it is they need to accomplish by the end. And then we're going to move to, let me actually just make sure I get all the group stuff. So we're focusing on preparing students for the individual challenge. We want to keep the group time short and efficient. Get everyone involved as much as possible and train them if needed. So you might have some students who aren't saying sentences with you, or they aren't saying vocabulary words with you when you're saying them, and you'll really want to follow through on that to make sure that every single one of your students is participating. You may even want to have your strong students whisper while your other students are speaking, so that you're positive that every student is participating and getting clear on what it is they need to accomplish. And then, of course, don't tell it to the stronger students. That previous picture that I had here, there's a teacher sort of pointing and calling on a student, and I wrote less of this. I see this a lot in classes, and it's not that it is always a bad thing. Calling on students, having students answer can be a good thing. But I see most teachers rely on this way too much. Every time that they look for student interaction, they're calling on single students to answer. And that, when one student is talking, that student is learning and all the other students are waiting. And very often it's the strong students who are raising their hands, and they already know the answer. They didn't actually need to share that with you in order to learn it. Whereas your weaker students, they're sitting and they're waiting, and they're not really learning from that experience. They're not just learning the material because a strong student answered a question in the classroom. So we don't want to tailor the group time to the strong students by just letting them respond, or they're so loud and all of the weak students to sort of kind of mimic them. We want to make sure that all of the students are participating well during that group time. Follow up with me again, later if you have any more questions about that group time. So after the groups, we're going to move to partners. So we're going to take what they have been practicing as a group, whether it's the science concept or those 10 vocabulary words or those grammar sentences or a list of phonics words, and they're going to practice with a partner. Now, they should be very clear about what they need to do with their partner at this point, because we just did it as a group. So if it was a list of words, then we read the list of words together. If it was 3 grammar sentences, then we practiced those 3 grammar sentences together as a class. If it was a summary of the water cycle, then we've already practiced that together as a group. So we're going to take that same content and we're going to have our students practice it with a partner now. And they tend to love this. They love to talk with each other. They enjoy interacting with each other. And so we can, leverage that for motivation. And so that was, again, we come back to those 3 concepts earlier. For getting students to take responsibility for their learning, we need them to be clear on what they have to do. We need them to feel confident that they can complete that goal. And we need them to be motivated. We need them to feel that doing the assignment, accomplishing it, is better than not doing it. And so this partner time is a good time to do that. And I love doing lots of fun games and activities at this point, but I almost always do them with partners. At most, I try to keep it at a 2 to 3. So, and I guess it's not just partners, but 3 students is fine too. And the reason for that is we want all of our students participating as much as possible. When you have a group of 6 students together, the amount of time each student spends speaking goes down dramatically. When you have 2 students in a group, they're both required to speak a lot. And that's what we want. We want them repeating those vocabulary words over and over and over and over again. We want them repeating that summary of the water cycle over and over and over and over again. We want them repeating those grammar sentences over and over and over and over again. And how do we do that? Well, there's a lot of games that you can do. And if you need activity ideas like these, you can go to kidinspired.com/activities. And I have begun gathering lots and lots of games activities that you can use there. And I continue to add to it a lot. So, keep checking in there. I will keep adding to it. But there are quite a few there, and they're organized in their different categories. So there's writing activities, and there are speaking activities and vocabulary activities. So you can go and find specifically, whatever you're working on, activities for that area. But you can do think, pair, share. This is really popular activity. You've got people like Larry Filazzo and Carol Salva, Valentina Gonzalez, these teachers who, very well respected. They love this activity. Tanya Singer Ward, she talks about think, pair, share. It's a great activity. You basically, would have students first think about what it is that they want to say, then they get with a partner, and then they share. And it's very simple, but also very effective. And so if you have, vocabulary words, you would have the students think maybe of one sentence for one of the vocabulary words, and they would get with a partner and share their sentence. If it's the concept of, water cycle, they would first think about it, then they would get with a partner and share, put it in their own words. And so think, pair, share is a great activity for partners where you can get them practicing what they are learning for that class. A cute question and answer board game. I like these. I can show you an example later of something like that, where students would move their piece along a game board, and when they arrive on a space, they have to ask a question or answer a question, and so it depends on what you're focusing on. If the grammar that you're focusing on is the answer, then what the other student would ask the question. And so I'm moving the game piece, and I arrive on this space. The other student asks me a question, I have to answer it, and if I answer correctly, then I get to stay. If I answer it incorrectly, then I have to move back 3 spaces. So a question and answer kind of board game that would go very well with concepts. If you have 3 question and answers for a science concept, or if you have a grammar topic where you're learning sentence structure and they're asking and answering questions using that grammar structure. Or vocabulary words, if you move your piece along the game board and they arrive on a spot, and the other student is going to point to a vocabulary word, and then that student needs to say that word or a sentence for that word, then they can stay. If they can't remember the vocabulary word, then they move back 3 spaces. So those kinds of partner activities are really good. Partner challenge, I put that one up there. That's kind of a reading. I tend to use that with reading. So you would sit down with a partner and you would time me as I read. The other student would time me as I read, and I'd see how fast I can read a passage. So for decoding, this is very, very helpful for students to get very fluent with reading a passage before maybe you are going to go focus on understanding and comprehension. We want to focus on being able to decode the passage. So I'm going to read the passage one time through, the other student's going to time me, and then I'm going to switch, I'm going to time that student, and they're going to read, and they're going to write down the time that it took them to read that passage. And then we're going to switch back to me, and I'm going to take another shot at reading this passage to see if I can read it faster the second time than I did the first time. So that's a really fun activity. Partner challenge, you can also do, how many present tense sentences can you make in a minute? That's a really fun partner challenge that you can use. And there's lots of them. Come back to me later if you want to hear some more examples. Another one that I really like is paper, scissors, stone. Requires absolutely nothing but hands. And so you get with a partner and, paper, scissors, stone. And the person who wins tells the other person something they need to say. So maybe it's, you have to say these vocabulary words, or maybe you have to say a summary of the concept, or you have to read the passage, or you have to say these grammar sentences, something like that. So, and then once they're done, they play a game, paper, scissors, stone, and then the winner again chooses something for the other person to say. Those kinds of partner activities. So group, partners, and then finally individuals. And this individual portion is incredibly important. When we get down to the individual time, we want each student to be able to pass a challenge that shows that they understand or have mastered the goal for that class. So we talked earlier about having manageable and measurable goals. So maybe our goal was to read the list of phonics words. And so the challenge that students would want to pass individually is read these words to the teacher individually without help. And when you can pass that challenge, you're done. If you can't pass that challenge, that's no problem. Just go back to your table and keep practicing. You can practice however you would like. You can practice with a partner. You can practice by yourself. You can practice by writing words in the air. You can close your eyes and say it to yourself. You can write it on paper. Whatever works for you is perfectly fine. Giving students choice is wonderful for building motivation. So again, one of those 3 concepts we had from before, to get students to take responsibility. If you let them choose, they are going to feel much more interested in taking responsibility. So at this point is a great time to give them some choice. However you want to practice is fine with me. When you are ready, you come and you pass this challenge, or try to pass this challenge with me. So if it's 3 grammar sentences, they're going to come and say those 3 sentences to me. If it's the water cycle, the science concept, they're going to come and say a summary of that water cycle to me. And of course, after that, you could have them go and now go write that summary, or go write me a summary. But have them say it. Maybe the challenge is to say it first. And then academic vocabulary, which I think Gretchen mentioned earlier, you would have the students come up and say, these 5 academic vocabulary words to me, and tell me in your own words what each one means. So those are very manageable and measurable goals that students can accomplish in a single class. So you're going to give them some time. They're going to practice individually. They're going to come to you when they're ready. And then the final piece of this strategy is to give them some reward time. So at the end of this series, so you groups, partners, and now finally individuals. The individuals are coming to you and passing a challenge. When they have passed a challenge, you can reward the students who have passed the challenge with some reward time. I love to call this the area of awesomeness. I just think that's a fun way of putting it, and the kids enjoy that. And I have an area in the classroom where I put, board games or word searches or books, anything that students would be interested in playing or doing. You can have crafts. There's all kinds of things. As long as they are over there and having a good time, and they're quiet, and they're being kind, and they're speaking English, then you're golden. You can go enjoy having some unstructured play time. You've worked hard. You've completed this challenge. You get to have some unstructured playtime. And so that's that motivation. And the idea is that the faster that they complete a challenge, the more time they have to play in the area of awesomeness. So they get to enjoy more playtime, unstructured playtime, if they work harder. So that brings a lot of motivation to your students. You'll find that students, because they want to go play in the area of awesomeness, they will work really, really hard to complete those challenges. And you'll see at that point, if you set this up well, you'll find that more and more you're able to step back and watch your students take responsibility for their learning. You're going to be in charge of that group time. You have to set up what they need to learn and make it very, very clear to them what goal they need to accomplish by the end of the class, and help them move towards that goal so that they're much more familiar with what they need to do before you turn it over to them. So again, if we want students to take responsibility, we need three things. We need them to be clear on what goals they need to accomplish. We need them to feel confident that they're able to accomplish those goals. So we've built confidence through that group time and then the partner time. And then also we need students to be motivated. And so by leveraging the partner time with some fun activities for students to use to practice the material, they're going to be more motivated. By leveraging the area of awesomeness, the more quickly that they complete challenges, the more time that they have to have unstructured play. Those are going to help create motivation. Now, we of course want our students to enjoy learning and learn for the sake of learning, and that would be amazing. And so I would definitely recommend at every juncture to remind them that learning is fun, learning is interesting. Don't you feel good? Don't you feel good having passed this challenge? You have accomplished something. You have completed these goals. You are getting better. You can see, you can feel that you are getting better, right? And students will very often be like, yeah, I do. I feel good. Like I feel like I have made progress. And that's because your goals were so clear and so concrete. It's not this big abstract goal for, the whole semester that students feel like, they never really know if they've met a goal or not. They are being able to meet regular goals each day, and because of that they're going to feel a lot more confident, a lot more interested in learning for the sake of learning, which is great. And a lot of your strong students are like that already. Some of your average students might be like that. Some of your weak students will actually start to, over time, feel convinced that, one, they're capable. They can actually do this, just like everybody else can. And two, that they're more interested in the topics that you're learning. So it's a wonderful way of setting up your class. And I'd highly recommend trying this out with your students. Moving from the groups down to the partners and then finally the individuals, that structure. I have some freebies for you. What I'd like to do before I show you that, I have some specific examples that I thought I might show you to just give you an idea of what this might look like. And so I'm going to share my screen with you real fast. And give you an idea of what this can look like with some actual content. All right, here's my screen. I'm going to turn it over. Hi, Nadia, from Minneapolis now, and arrived from Ukraine. Welcome to the United States. Let's take a look at this. This is the ESL curriculum membership stuff, and so I can use these as some examples. Beginners 1 to 3 cover all of the phonics topics and major, common speech patterns, sentence structures, and things like that. And I thought I would take a look at long I as a good example. So in here, there are a lot of challenge sheets that you can use, and the challenge sheets are for setting up your goals. And so I can download a challenge sheet like this. And what I mean by manageable and measurable. So this is a list of 6 words, 8 words. There are 6 words that follow the phonics pattern, I, magic E, I, E, I, G, H, and 2 sight words. There's some spelling words off to the side, but let's focus on the phonics of that. And so this would be a manageable and measurable goal for students to accomplish by the end of a class. And so I would work through this list together as a class. I could put it on the board. I can print this off and have them read it. They would read hike, excuse me, I, hike, I, fine, I, die, I, tie. We'd read through that together as a class. And then I would, after we've read through it as class, I would turn it over to them, read it to me. I want to hear you guys read it. And so then they would read through the words. And then I could take this and give them, put them in partners, and they could practice reading these words together with a partner. They could, read the words first, and then they could play a game like paper, scissors, stone, and the loser has to read the words, or the winner has to read the words, or the winner chooses 2 words for the other student to read, something like that. And then by the individual time, I would say to students, you need to practice these words, and when you can read them, come to me and read them to me. And if you can read them all without mistakes by yourself, without help, then I will sign. So you can see at the bottom there's a place to sign or stamp. And so that is what you can do with the phonics. Let me try to give you another example here with grammar about let's see, beginners for, I'll give you because this is the unit I'm sharing with you later. I have a freebie to give you here in a little bit, and it's on be verbs. And you can see that you've got vocabulary, sentences, and then conversation and reading. They're all in there. And so you could set up in one class, 2 or 3 or 4 different challenges. So remember the vocabulary words and come say them to me, be able to say 3 sentences to me, and be able to read this passage to me. When you've accomplished all 3 of those goals, then you get to go play in the area of awesomeness. But let's just take a look at this this sheet here. This is a speaking page where you have pictures at the top and then sentences down below. And you can have students make sentences together. So the duck isn't dirty, the duck is clean. And we would say those sentences together as a class, and then we move on to the next one. The duck, number 2 or 3 and 4, the duck isn't clean, the duck is dirty. And so we're saying them together as a class, and we'd go through them a few times, and then I would put them with partners, and they could practice with partners. And then by the end of the class, the goal would be for them to come up to me and say, 4 sentences without mistakes. If you notice at the bottom of these papers, this is another way of setting up your goals. You can have like a bronze medal, a silver medal, and a gold medal. And so students working at their seats to accomplish the challenge, they can come up, and if they can say 6 sentences without mistakes, then they get a bronze medal. but they can also go back to their seat and keep working. And if they can up that up to 10 sentences, then they can get a silver medal, or gold medal would be 16 sentences. And so your stronger students, you can actually give them a higher goal without making it overly difficult for your weaker or your average students. Students can kind of go for the goal that they feel comfortable with. But every single student is passing a goal, passing a challenge individually. And so with this paper, I have it designed this way in a particular way. I had another example here, but you can actually fold this bottom half under. I don't know if you can see that or not, but the bottom half of the page, the sentences, the answers are at the bottom. And so you can actually fold. Sorry, Terea, I'm not sure what happened with the webinar. You can always catch the replay though too, so if you missed anything. You can fold the bottom half of that paper under, and so students can only see the pictures and the hints. And so that's another way to get them practicing without just without just reading answers. We don't want them reading answers off the screen. So that would be a grammar kind of sentence goal that you could have for your students. I also heard, let's see, I heard science topics. So let me find a science topic like the Earth's surface, citizenship here, erosion, weathering, and deposition. Great science topic. That's a weather-related one. So just like what someone, I think it was Tammy, said earlier. So with this one, maybe your goal is that students should be able to read a passage on this science topic and be able to read it for understanding. And so that would be maybe an end goal, but we'd have to break that goal up into different parts. So we'd want to start with learning vocabulary that they need to know, and then maybe the grammar that they need to know, and then maybe a summary of the concept. And then, okay, now read the passage and tell me what you have learned from that passage in writing. So that would be, for a higher level, lower intermediate or intermediate level student, that would be something that they could accomplish. And so you could come over here and you could, start with vocabulary, give them some sentences to practice using those vocabulary. And these are more higher level vocabulary words, more difficult words. So this would be a little bit like what Gretchen mentioned earlier, so academic vocab, so erosion, weathering, flood. And so you could start with the first row here and go through as a class and practice those together. And the goal at the end of the class could either be say 8 words to me without from memory, or be able to say 4 words to me in sentences, or be able to remember all of the vocabulary words. That would be a very specific, manageable, and measurable goal for a class with academic vocabulary. Because academic vocabulary are more difficult, they're usually a bit more of a mouthful, or can be. Depending on your students, you may want to make it more manageable by starting with maybe 4 words or 6 words. And once they've accomplished that, then you could go on to the next words. But the more that students get good at remembering things that they're learning, the more that they start taking responsibility for what they learn, you'll find that the faster that they're able to learn. And so you'll find that the more that you do this, the more that you turn the class over to your students for them to work hard on their own and accomplish tasks, and you're more of a coach, you'll find that they actually you get a lot more done in a class than you would otherwise. And so, you might find that at the beginning, you can't give them tasks that are as difficult. You have to sort of simplify them a bit. But over time, you'll find that they're able to do a lot more in the same amount of time using some of these methods. Let's see, I could find past tense irregular verbs would be another one that you could use with your students. There's lots of challenges that you could be giving them. So that kind of gives you an idea of the kinds of challenges, the kinds of goals that you would want to be setting for your students and expecting them to be able to accomplish by the end of the class. So that's kind of the layout that I wanted to get through today. And so let me just head back over to my webinar slides here real fast. And I kind of wanted to hear from you if you have any questions for me about anything that I've gone over today, or any problems that you're running into the classroom that you'd like to discuss. And so just drop a question into the chat there, and I'd love to hear from you. What your thoughts, observations, questions might be. And I will also throw up the slideshow again here. Yeah, what questions or observations do you have? How do you push more writing with state testing coming soon? Yeah, writing is, thank you, Brianna, for asking that. Writing is a complex topic. And the reason why it's so difficult for students is because it does involve a number of different tasks. When a student sits down to write, and they're looking at, maybe it's a blank sheet of paper, and they're expected to, respond to a question, or they're expected to, summarize what they've read, or to show that they've learned something. There are any number of issues that they could run into when it comes to that. And so when it comes to state testing, you've got state testing coming soon. I know the WIDA access these tests in the United States. A lot of students are coming up on those, and teachers are trying to prepare them for that. When they sit down to take a test like that, there could be any number of issues that are causing them difficulties. It could be that they don't know the vocabulary words. They don't understand the vocabulary words. So it could be a vocabulary issue. Maybe it's spelling. Maybe they know the words, they can speak just fine, but they can't write them out. They can't spell the words that they need to be able to use to write the paragraph or write the response. It might be oh, Brianna lost me after WIDA. The writing is something that involves a number of different tasks. Sorry, I'll just kind of recap really fast. Writing involves vocabulary, it involves spelling, it involves reading, and it involves understanding the concepts, and there's a number of areas in grammar, the sentence structures that are involved. So any number of those places could be part of the reason why a student would struggle with writing. And of course, you have strong writers in your class, and you wish that everybody were just like them. Students who, you give them some paper and they just write wonderful, essays or responses. Sorry, Brianna, I know I'm breaking up. If I am breaking up still, just let me know. Am I back now? I know there's a little bit of a delay. I'll just wait until you give me the heads up. Am I back now, or am I still breaking up? Good. I got the go ahead from Brianna. Thanks. Okay, thank you, Renal. Thank you, Brianna. The problem is that we obviously have to have lots and lots of practice in each of these areas in order for students to be able to write well. So when teachers say that they wish their students could write more, write better, we have to really understand what the student is struggling with in particular. Why are they struggling with writing? Is it because they don't know the vocabulary words that they need? They have a very low vocabulary bank. Is it because they don't know how to put those words into sentences? Is it because they don't understand the concept? Is it because they can't understand what they're reading? So a lot of times teachers want students to write in response to a passage of text, or there's a question that students need to read and respond to. If the students can't read the question, then they are not going to be able to respond well. And of course, any student who struggles with reading is going to struggle with writing. And so writing, again, it's a very complex topic. It involves a number of different skills, and we would need to understand exactly what skills each student would need to work on. So you've got testing coming up very quickly, and one of the issues that you don't always have a lot of time to prepare them, and you want them to do as well as they can possibly do. And so honestly, with writing, one of the best ways that I have found to help students improve in writing is to walk them through a step process like what I'll tell you right now. Let me pull up a specific example again. I think I have. Let me use a science topic. If we're talking about WIDA and access, those tend to be a little higher level. So something like lamb forms. If you want students to write well, you start at a vocabulary level, and you would set up a goal where they are remembering the vocabulary that they need to use to write on a passage. And so getting them remembering those vocabulary words and saying them to you would be step one. Getting them to work on the grammar. So this would be step two. This is present tense for science. And so if they can use those vocabulary words in sentences with focused grammar, like present tense, then in speaking, they're going to be much more capable of putting those ideas into words, into sentences, communicating what it is that they need to say. And then you have some sort of a reading passage that you can have them read. So this is an example of a reading passage. So after you've got the vocabulary, then the sentences, structures that they need, and then they would read a passage, so focusing on the reading. And having them read through a passage and discuss what it means. When you do these different things, so vocabulary, you're going to see pretty clearly, are they struggling to remember vocabulary words? Is it difficult for them to remember vocabulary words? Or are they learn them quickly, they pop them off, no problem? Because if remembering vocabulary words is easy, that's probably not the issue with their writing. Sentences, if they, go back to that sentence again, if they are, I didn't share my screen. Sorry, let me share my screen real fast. Yeah, if they, where's my vocabulary? So vocabulary, if they can remember the vocabulary words, no problem. Yeah, that's easy for them. Then vocabulary is probably not their problem. And you can safely move on to sentences. And if they're able to say those vocabulary words in sentences without much difficulty, then you're probably not dealing too much with grammar and communicating concepts. And then if you get onto the reading, I think I pulled up a reading passage here. You get onto the reading, and they're able to read through that passage, no problem. And then you can tell from that, they know the vocabulary words. They don't have any trouble remembering them. They can make sentences, no problem. They can read, no problem. Let's test out the spellings. So then maybe let's spell these vocabulary words and see how you're doing with spelling things out. And then you find that, wow, these students cannot spell a word to save their lives. And so then you would be very clear about the hang-up when it comes to writing for them. And you could focus more on good phonics skills, sounding words out, hearing the different sounds. Those kind of phonetic skills are hugely helpful for writing. Maybe you go through the vocabulary words, then they're fine, the sentences, and they're fine, and you find that they can't read. And if they're struggling with reading, they're definitely going to struggle with, that's cool, Gretchen, working on landforms with their fourth graders. So if you find that they're struggling with the reading, then that's going to be where you want to focus. And again, reading and reading comprehension is another huge topic, which would be difficult for me to get into in any detail today. But if they're struggling to decode words when they're reading, so maybe they are fine with the vocabulary, fine with the sentences, they understand the concepts, no problem. You've already tested that with the vocabulary and the sentences. You know that that's not the issue. So when they sit down to read and they're struggling to sound words out, it's very likely a decoding issue. They're unable to sound out the different words. Phonetics, teaching phonics is somewhat debated among teachers, and I am a huge fan of phonics. I find phonics to be helpful for both, for pronunciation, for spelling, and especially for reading. When students run into a word that they don't know, they can sound out or get in the habit of sounding out the different sounds in that word and putting them together. Because they are English learners, they don't have the sizable vocabulary that a native speaker would have, and so they are going to be likely to guess wrong if they're guessing. And so what I tend to find, if students have very poor phonics skills and they're English learners and they don't read very well, they mumble. They try to cover up what it is that they're reading so that you can't tell if they're reading it correctly or not. And because you're a busy teacher and you don't have a lot of time in class, you kind of have to let them off the hook because you don't have the time to fix the problem. So they would read something like this, and when we look at a picture or from outer earth, and you can't understand a word that they're saying. They're kind of mimicking the sounds. They kind of sound it, but to be honest, they don't understand probably anything that they're reading. And if they can't read, if they're struggling with reading like that, they are going to do very, very poorly on any state testing that you have. And so that would be the first and most primary skill that I would recommend. If you can improve their reading, their writing will improve much more naturally. So that's one thing. Now, if they are, they can know the vocabulary, their sentences are fine, their reading is okay, spelling is okay, and they're just not writing, you get to that point, you can give them, I have here another example of a short writing passage that you can use with your students. So here's like the same thing with landforms. So a short paragraph. And what I would do is work on a paragraph like this with your students. So the structure of the paragraph, the content, you've got, topic sentence, details, and then, a concluding sentence. That structure, they should be able to explain that structure to you. And then they should have a very good example in their heads of that kind of structure. So I would honestly have them memorize a paragraph like this. And so in my class, I might set up, 2 or 3 different challenges. The first challenge might be explain the structure of a paragraph to me. And when you have passed that challenge, I want you to be able to say this paragraph to me in your own words. And so it doesn't have to be word for word memorized, but they are able to put this paragraph into their own words and say it to me. So they have a very good, solid, idea of a paragraph in their head. This is a scaffold. And so, a lot of teachers talk about using scaffolds in their class, and I'm a huge fan of using scaffolds with your students. But I also feel that we have to be very, very careful with scaffolds, that students rely on them too much. If the scaffold has to be there with them in order to succeed, then as soon as they get into a state testing environment, they don't have a scaffold anymore, and so they're stuck. And so we need to teach them in such a way that they don't need the scaffolds any longer. And so a scaffold like this page, you can use it, but then the goal would be that they've practiced it in such a way that they don't need it any longer. And so you can take that scaffold away and they would still be able to, recall that scaffold and use it, put it to use. And so I would have them, explain the structure of a paragraph to me, tell me this paragraph in your own words, and then after that I would have them do something that's, let's see if I can find an example here. You can have them do some brainstorming. and brainstorming is for the paragraph. That's probably a good example. So now that they have the structure and they have a paragraph in their heads, now they're going to write their own paragraph. And so this is where they would come up with ideas, and then they would write a new paragraph. It's still on the same topic. It's still, covering things that they should know, have learned, and then they're going to organize those details, and then they're going to write them and write them. They can write them on a graphic organizer like this one here, to organize their details. But then finally, they're going to just need to put it on paper. And so giving them some line paper to be able to put that down. And if you step them through that process, so you have, you've worked on the vocabulary, you've worked on the sentence structures that they need, you've read and understood the concepts that they need, and they have shown you that they understand the structure of a paragraph. They've committed a good paragraph to memory that they can access for writing their own. And then they're finally, after all of that prep work, they're going to be able to write a much better paragraph for you. Now, if they still can't write their own, I would honestly have them write the scaffolded paragraph out from memory. I would just, if you don't have time to do all the brainstorming, because you may not have a lot of time, you can have them write out this paragraph without looking. So, basically the challenge would be turn this paper into me. I will give you lined paper, and then you write this paragraph out in your own words, using good paragraph structure, using the vocabulary you've learned and the grammar structures you've learned. And so that's how I would work with students on writing. And you'll be surprised when you set it up this way. One, becomes very clear which students are struggling with what. If it's a vocabulary issue or a phonics issue or a reading issue, and you'll be able to focus on exactly what the students need in order to get better. But it also, you'll find that by setting it up this way, students, they are much clearer about what they need to do. They're much more confident and they're much more motivated. And so you'll find that they're more likely to take responsibility for doing good writing if you set things up this way. What I have found is most students want to do well. They want to impress you. They want to do good writing, and they want to do, they want to read well. They want to be able to show that they've learned material and have you say good job. Most students, every student, I would say honestly, even the most bitter, angry ones, that's what they would love to see happen. It is maybe they've given up already. But if you can help them take those steps and move towards those goals and complete those goals, they are going to feel much more confident that they're capable of doing it, and then take much more interest in it. And of course, when they complete a goal and you're celebrating them and excited and pumped and cheering them on, they are going to go back the next time, and they're going to be far more motivated to do an even better job the following class and classes. So that's how I would work with the writing. Again, writing is complicated, and I probably talk about it all day, and I hope that's clear. Brianna, does that kind of help a little bit with your question about pushing more writing? I would love to hear back, and of course, if you have any other questions, I'd love to hear back from anyone else about any other questions you have. I know we've gone about an hour and a half now, and it's getting time to probably let you guys go. I know that's good, Brianna. I'm glad it was helpful. I will probably end up doing this again at some point, and it's helpful to hear what kind of topics you guys are interested in, because we could go into more detail on any of these topics in the future. So I will, keep in touch. Email me, respond to emails, let me know what it is that you're interested in hearing more about, and we can do more of that. Any other questions before we call it a day? I know it's getting late for some of you, and I'll just give a second for the delay. And if not, then I will. I'll let you guys go. I really appreciate you showing up. I had a good time talking with you today about these things. I hope it was helpful. And stay in touch. Email me. I think all of you are on my email list, and so anything I send you, I'd love to hear back from you. I'd love to hear what's working for you, what's not, so yeah, send me an email. Say hi. You're welcome, Gretchen. It's good to see you guys, and I'll look forward to talking to you soon. Bye bye.